Welcome to Mixing Media, I'm Austin, and reviewing entire sagas was just too much. I felt like after reviewing all of the Alabasta saga in a single episode, I didn't really get to give everything as much time and attention as it deserved. So today, we're just going to take a look at the Jaya arc, and thank God that's all we're taking a look at, because with all of this information that One Piece has just thrown at me, my brain is flowing with theory juices. Okay, sure. In just 9 episodes, One Piece introduced me to what had to have been 20 new characters, and Bellamy to probably a pretty life-changing head injury. So come take a seat at the bar and I'll start making us some drinks while we dive into the fantastic world building of Jaya. Starting with all of those new character introductions. Mainly because I'd like to take a minute to complain about Crunchyroll, because they did not translate any of these character introductions, or at least not in the dub. So I do primarily watch the dub, do with that what you will. And as we're entering the world government meeting and going to the Blackbeard pirates and the Whitebeard pirates and all this kanji that's telling me who everybody is popping up on screen, none of it is translated. I don't know who any of these people were, and I didn't realize at the time that the sub actually does have it subtitled, and you'd think that they could just pop those subtitles over to the dub, because I watched the dub with subtitles anyway, and you know, to that point, half the subtitles for the show don't even line up anyway. So I actually ended up using the camera feature on Google Translate and just took a picture of the screen so I could figure out who all these people were. So I did get there in the end, but Crunchyroll did not make it easy on me. So the first group that we're introduced to is the 5 elders who run the world government, and I gotta say, there is a lot of great beards on this council of elders. You can just feel the testosterone. And speaking of world government, you know what sounds super sketchy? A singular world government. With how big the world of One Piece is, and more so just how vastly different the peoples and cultures are from island to island, there is just no way that this government is governing effectively. And speaking of not governing effectively, that's actually why they're meeting today, because Luffy and the crew successfully toppled one of their 7 warlords, Alligator in Alabasta. And we actually get to meet 2 more of their pirates on payroll. Bartholomew Kuma, who I don't think said a single word, but has the best head-to-body ratio in the game, and Don Quixote Doflamingo, who just immediately seems super evil, and like maybe he can kind of control people like puppets from the way he was making those 2 guys fight. But I will be curious to see how much of his character is actually based on the famous Spanish novel about a man named Don Quixote who consumed so much fiction that he actually went insane. Couldn't be me. I actually got into the full Spanish history behind Don Quixote and his affinity for fighting windmills in a different episode about all of the Spanish influences in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. So if you want to learn more about that, you should go check out that episode. On top of the 2 warlords, the big man himself, Hawkeye Mihawk, walks in, and that is how you know this meeting is going to be a big freaking deal. And on top of that, we get introduced to a guy with a seagull on his head who seems to be some kind of high-up marine, somebody's grandma, and a mime who looks like he's about to break out into tap dancing. And he is actually a member of Blackbeard's crew, who I will actually get more into a little bit later. Now, last but not least, we're introduced to Whitebeard, who is just enormous. Like, I'm pretty sure that he is a giant from Elbaf, but I'm not really sure why he's on life support. I wonder if it has anything to do with Blackbeard, because I know that he attacked somebody and got kicked out of the Whitebeard pirates. So I'll be curious to learn more about that. And you know, we also learn a little bit more about a contentious relationship between Shanks and Whitebeard. But all in all, this has to be the most eventful 10 minutes of One Piece that I've seen so far, because it feels like the world just opened up to me in a similar way to when the crew first goes up Reverse Mountain and reaches the Grand Line, because up until this point, we're really only seeing the world from Luffy and the crew's point of view, and now we're starting to spread out to the other players and what they're up to and orchestrating what's going on. And going back to the crew, we have one more introduction to do there, because Nico Robin has joined the crew, and she is just immediately exactly what the crew needed. She adds a much needed level of calmness and maturity to an otherwise pretty crazy group of teenagers. And I think the age difference is super well illustrated in a later scene where everybody's having a party at Montblanc's house, and people are stuffing food in their mouths and chugging drinks and being super rowdy. Meanwhile, Robin is just sitting over in the corner, calmly reading a book and snacking on a reasonable amount of food. She just has this great aura about her. And it was actually really fun watching her hit Nami with some wisdom about trusting her instruments, trusting the log pose, because it's such a role reversal. Like, normally Nami is the one who's got everything together and is taking charge in the crew. But this was also the moment that I realized that there is a reason why the log pose is a sphere. Like, I figured they just did it to visually differentiate it from a compass, but no, there actually is a purpose, because some islands are in the sky, apparently. And it also makes me wonder if the log pose will ever point down and they'll go to some kind of underwater island or something. Is it still an island if it's underwater? I don't know. But this also got me wondering why the log pose was pointing to Sky Island. I mean, I understand how it works. You spend enough time on the previous island and then the log pose starts pointing to the next one. But if everybody who was on Alabaster going forward down the Grand Line had their log poses pointing to Sky Island, then the majority of people wouldn't deny that it even existed. Which makes me wonder if it's not so much every log pose as it is the crew's specific log pose, who was given to them by the lighthouse attendant. I forget his name. But, you know, and I wouldn't be surprised if maybe he had traveled the entire Grand Line. There was more to his character, because as the crew is going away, he says like, oh, these people will do well, Roger. So I think there's more to that lighthouse attendant guy than we know. Now, as the crew is sitting there kind of baffled by the log post pointing up to Sky Island, a giant mysterious ship just starts falling out of the sky and almost completely smashes the Going Merry. But thanks to Robin's archaeological skills, who would have thought you'd need an archaeologist on a pirate voyage, but here we are, they're able to determine that this was a voyage that set out from the Bliss Kingdom in the North Blue. And the way that Robin is able to determine this is thanks to some rudimentary medical procedures that were performed on a skull of one of the crew members that she reassembled. And this got me wondering if these medical procedures were real that they call out, and spoilers, they actually are. And maybe I'm thinking too hard about this, but I think it tells me something about the One Piece world. So the first of these techniques is called craterization, and it's used to relieve cranial pressure from things like tumors or fluid buildup, and it's done by just literally drilling 3 holes in the skull, kind of bowling ball style, and then that relieves the pressure. And this technique is almost as old as the very first ever civilization. It is 5,000 years old. The next of these techniques is having tar on the teeth to help protect them. And this is even older. This goes back to the Neolithic era, 13,000 years ago, where they would use a rock to drill out cavities, which just sounds like an absolute nightmare, and then fill it in with tar in a way that's not too different from like modern dental fillings. What I find interesting about these techniques as it relates to the One Piece world is that the real world equivalents are super old, but in the One Piece world, they're only about 200 years old. And I think this is interesting because the One Piece world is such an odd mixture of different time periods. Like, the piracy and knowledge of the world, or lack thereof, would imply their technology is probably around like the 1600s, but then they have electricity and mechanical limbs and stuff like that. I know you're supposed to just take that at face value, and I'm probably just thinking too hard about it, but in my experience, Oda tends to want you to think harder about it, and what I think is that there is a reason that certain areas of knowledge are more lacking than others, like maybe somebody didn't want you to know about the wider world that they live in. And I think we see more of this when we get to the story of Noland the Liar, but for now, the crew are in desperate need of knowledge on Sky Island, so they dive down into the mysterious ship using some makeshift diving suits that Usopp built. And I love these diving suits. Usopp is like the kid who invents a rocket ship out of the cardboard boxes his parents give him. But in the One Piece world, it can actually work. So once they're down in the ship, the two main things that the crew discovers is one, a treasure chest with a mysterious feather in it that I was certain was gonna have something to do with getting to Sky Island, but then they just wrote up a giant geyser. Maybe there's an easier way with the feather or something. And the other is that one of the crew members was murdered, which just adds even more to the great eerie sense of mystery that this arc has. Like, why did this 200-year-old ship just now fall out of the sky? Why was this guy murdered? All questions that the crew don't really get any time to think about, because while they're down there, a salvage ship shows up to take the ship that's captained by one of the two monkey brothers, Masuda. So I have some real mixed feelings about these monkey brothers, just because I have some real mixed feelings about monkeys in general. They're just little monsters. But if I had to choose, I would definitely choose the other monkey brother because his name is actually a pretty interesting pun. So his name is Shoujo, which translates directly to young girl, but is probably a reference to the genre of manga and anime meant for young girls, which is why he has such long, flowing green hair, just like a shoujo protagonist. But depending on how you spell it, shoujo can also be translated to orangutan. So that's why he is the most fabulous monkey at sea. But going back to Masuda, it was very entertaining watching Nami play him for an absolute fool. It's a fun change of pace to see Nami actually leverage her feminine charms versus the usual anime girl bashful reaction of like, oh, don't look at me. Well, either that or they go the tsundere route and just start getting super violent. But not Nami. Nami owns it, and I appreciate that about her. So before the salvage ship is fully able to recover the wreck, a gigantic turtle shows up and eats the whole thing, only to be immediately one-upped by even bigger shadow giant angel people, heralded by the most ominous cloud I have ever seen, that we later learn is called a cumulo regalis. And this adds an ethereal touch to the already eerie mystery of the arc. This arc just has fantastic atmosphere. Fantastic and terrifying. So the crew hightail it out of there, abandon Masuda at sea, and thanks to Nico Robin stealing the Eternal Pose from the salvage ship, they finally reach the island of Jaya proper. Now, Jaya is about 50% resort, 50% jungle, and 100% home to Wild Cherry Pub and Pies, which is a restaurant I desperately wish was real and was near me. I would love to get a drink and eat some pies. And it's also here that we get our first encounter with Bellamy, who is essentially the anti-Luffy. Like, this man hates dreams, and he keeps going on about some new age of piracy that I don't even really understand what he's talking about. He even said that the One Piece isn't real, something that I would never say. The more I keep thinking about it, the more I've started to convince myself that Luffy will never be the Pirate King and that the One Piece probably isn't even real. Okay, I am officially taking back what I said in the One Piece predictions video because I just don't want to be in the same boat as that guy. No pirate pun intended. So with Bellamy being the anti-Luffy, the two quickly clash in the bar, although it's a very one-sided clash. Luffy and Zoro kind of just stand there and take a beating, and I get that Luffy is trying to make the point of like, oh, you're like such an ant, you're not even worth fighting, but that's a heck of a beating to take to just make that point. Though I will say it did add a lot to building up one of the best punches in anime that I've ever seen. But we'll get to that in just a minute. Now that they've been thoroughly beaten, Nami drags the boys out of the bar, and this is where they encounter Blackbeard. The conversation that Luffy has with Blackbeard outside the bar is oddly super tense. Like, you can tell that Luffy thinks this man is very dangerous, and he may not be the smartest, but he's got a pretty good intuition, so I'm inclined to believe him. Especially when he doesn't even realize yet that this is Blackbeard, so he can't connect the dots that this is the same guy who pillaged Drum Island and made Walpole flee, and also the same guy that Ace has been hunting for betraying the Whitebeard pirates. In fact, I'm hoping that since we see Ace has hopped on Buggy and Alvida's ship, While the crew is up in Sky Island, since everybody else is in roughly the same area, that we get a fun little B-plot of Ace chasing around Blackbeard. And for Blackbeard, I think that the very first scene where he meets Luffy in the bar and they both start yelling about pies and drinks is really telling, because he acts the exact same way as Luffy, just towards completely opposite ends. So that tells me that Blackbeard is also chasing a dream, but maybe it's just a more nefarious one. Like, if Bellamy is the anti-Luffy, maybe Blackbeard is the dark Luffy, you know? So after their tense conversation with Blackbeard, the crew head back to the ship, where Nami rages like I have never seen her rage before. And this is because she gets laughed out of the bar for actually believing that Sky Island is real. And this hits her right in the ego. Nami does not like to be laughed at, and I gotta say, it's nice to see her actually react like a real person and get upset when she gets embarrassed. I think between this and Nami being humbled by Nico Robin about the log pose, Nami actually gets a lot of really good character development in this arc. And for Nico Robin, while Luffy was getting in bar fights, she actually managed to do something and get a map of the island, which I stared at for a good few minutes trying to understand if its shape meant anything, because it's such a weird shape, but I couldn't really make heads or tails of it. The only thing that I could think is maybe the big bay, the empty missing spot in the middle, is that city of gold that Noland said sank in the Noland the Liar fairy tale. But I also think that the name of Southgrave is interesting too. I mean, knowing that it's a dense forest that's very fiercely protected by the animals led by the Southbird, it just makes me wonder if maybe there actually is a grave in Southgrave, and maybe an important one at that. So thanks to the lead on Robin's map, the crew sail off to the other side of the island in order to meet up with a mysterious man named Montblanc Cricket. And my first question here is, why is Chopper tweaking when they first land? Like, for no reason, he just starts obsessively digging, and when someone asks him why he's digging, he just freaks out. It happens so quick, I genuinely can't tell if this is just supposed to be background activity to keep our monkey brains interested while they're explaining everything, or if it genuinely means anything. So after that, we learn about the fairy tale of Noland the Liar, and I really love that they created this in-universe fairy tale. It just adds a lot to the world. And I also think it's wild that Cricket Montblanc is actually the descendant of Noland. Like, imagine being able to say, oh yeah, Cinderella is my great-great-grandmother. I also think it's really funny that the only reason the Monkey Brothers teamed up with him is because he's a descendant of the guy from the fairy tale, and they're just big fans of the fairy tale. They're very simple creatures. So after we get the fairy tale, Cricket gives us the true story, that Noland wasn't a liar and that Jaya is actually the island where he found the City of Gold. And on top of that, he gives Nami his logbook, which tells us two very important things. Number one, roughly what year it is. We're situated on a timeline for the very first time. So if the log entry was written about 400 years ago and the date on it is 1120, that tells me that modern times is probably sometime in the 1500s. And I don't know that this is really important yet, but it's definitely something I'm going to keep track of because I think it will become important as we learn about the history of the Grand Line. And number two, like I mentioned earlier, there has definitely been some lost knowledge in this world. Like, if 400 years ago, Noland encountered a skyfish and some kind of airship that the people around him were able to tell him came from Sky Island, that tells me that at one time, people knew about it. They didn't just scoff at its existence. And so something must have happened to cause them to lose all that knowledge. And I don't know if that's just localized to Sky Island, like maybe they wanted to erase their existence and retreat from the rest of the Grand Line, or if this has wider implications for the world as a whole. Like, maybe there was a point in time where we had way more knowledge about the Grand Line, and then that was lost through some kind of One Piece equivalent to the burning of the Library of Alexandria. And one thing that definitely doesn't help with this is killing the only person that has traveled the entire length of the Grand Line. Maybe Gold Roger knew something that he shouldn't have. He knew too much and they had to silence him. So back in modern times, Cricket and the Monkey Brothers, that would be a great band name. They agree to help the crew renovate the ship so that they can travel up to Sky Island and help prove that Noland wasn't a liar. And man, did I feel some secondhand relief for Usopp when they decided not to just scrap the Going Merry entirely, because that definitely felt like the direction that they were going in. But instead they just decided to turn it into some kind of sheep-chicken hybrid that can actually survive the knock-up currents, aka these rough CG nightmares. It's early CG, so I'll cut them some slack, and you know what? It still looks better than this one frame of Nami. But other than a remodeled ship, the crew need one more thing to actually navigate to the knock-up currents, and that is the Southbird. Yet another wonderful, adorable One Piece animal to add to the list, who actually has a really cool kind of Mesoamerican design to it. Even more so when you factor in the gold statues of it from the Lost Giant civilization, which Bellamy actually shows up and steals, prompting Luffy to go give him what is probably the most satisfying one-hit KO I've ever seen. Sorry, One Punch Man, eat your heart out. Luffy is on top now. He completely destroyed that slinky-legged scrub. And it was just as satisfying watching Blackbeard slam Bellamy's friend's face just right through the floor too. But Luffy even makes it back with enough time for the crew to take off, sail into a whirlpool, run into the Blackbeard pirates, and learn that Luffy's bounty has been increased to 100 million berries before sailing up a freaking geyser. This part really did feel incredible. One Piece just keeps upping the ante, and I am so excited to see what's above the clouds. I'm excited for the history of this world, and I'm excited to learn more about the major players in it. I'm even excited for the possibility that Luffy smashes Bellamy's face in all over again, because I'm calling it right now, this man is going to come back and he's going to be real upset about that first punch. Which is exactly why I thought for today's cocktail I would make Planter's Punch. Cheers. Everybody seems to have their own version of Planter's Punch, and I'm no different. So for mine, I like to add a bit of strong black tea and some cinnamon syrup to add some complexity to the lime, aromatic bitters, and rum, once again using my beloved Overproof Wray and Nephew. And this thing is immaculate. It's essentially a spicier, funkier limeade, and kind of a twist on the grog that I made all the way back in my very first One Piece episode. So with that, I'm Austin. Thanks so much to all my Patreon supporters for helping make this possible. I'm gonna go watch Skypiea right now, and I'll tell you all about it when I see you here next time on Mixing Media. Bye-bye. That's good stuff. Real good stuff.